Hi, I'm David Cochran, Dean of Business and Technology at Newman University. And with me today is Jacob Lynn, Senior Data Analytics and Governance Manager at Textron Aviation. Jacob brings a knowledge of the entire data lifecycle that's both deep and broad in scope. And so, of course, we recruited him to serve as one of our outstanding adjunct professors teaching in our Masters of Data Science program here at Newman University. Jacob, it turns out, brings a special passion for data storytelling, and so he leads our data dashboarding and storytelling course. So, Jacob, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, tell us about your current role. I mean, Senior Data Analytics and Governance Manager sounds pretty big. What do you do?
Yeah, I manage a team in our IT organization that's responsible for the Microsoft Power Platform of products, which includes Power BI, Power Apps, Power Automate, as well as the leadership over data governance efforts at the business. And really, I don't know that that truly encompasses what I do. We operate in a model where we have analytics teams that are out embedded in business units across the organization. So we serve as this central thought leader and culture ambassador, and manage the architecture of what our teams are working in data on. And so my role tends to extend into that culture change and really championing data-driven success, data-informed decision making, and how we architect and govern, most importantly, govern the systems that we use for data analytics and reporting across the enterprise.
Yeah, sounds pretty big. Now,
Yeah, it's a lot.
yeah. So, about how many roughly employees do you have here in the region?
Textron Aviation as a whole, I think, is around 14,000 employees. And that's globally. Here in Wichita, pretty heavy concentration. I don't have the number off the top of my head. And then in the data analytics space, we actually, one of the ways that we drive the culture of data analytics is through monitoring and administering a data analytics community. And that community has grown to about 400 members. Approximately 100 to 150 of them are pretty active. And of that, somewhere in the range of 50 to 60 or so have formal data titles, data analyst, data scientist, data engineer, and the like.
Mm-hmm. And so you've got a method of, I mean, your teams are embedded in your different business units, right? Is how you're
Correct.
organized, sort of a federated approach or a data mesh.
Yeah, I would say it's very close to a data mesh approach, definitely federated. We're working through what that looks like from a maturity standpoint, which may drive some changes in how we operate. But I think that we benefit greatly from the folks that are working with data being so close to the places that the data is being used because they understand far better than we could as a central IT team what the context of that data is. What are the needs of their business? How do we translate what we're seeing in the data to the reality of the business or what's happening in the business and with its customers? That model has been really successful at getting a lot of really strong depth of knowledge in each of these data domains. And as we mature, we're seeing an increase in activity of folks collaborating with each other across these domains to combine their data and find insights of how things interrelate to each other throughout all of the things that the company does.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I just have to, I can't help but mention that, Textron Aviation has been one of our favorite employers. We've hired a number of our graduates from our programs, and they've loved working for you. But also, you guys have been such a great source of feedback and insight as we've been developing our programs and upgrading them over time. The things we've learned by listening to how things work in the real world, right, has really benefited us and our students. So thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So today we've got the option of taking a college degree in data analytics or data science. That wasn't your path. How did you find your way into data analytics?
Yeah, I love this question because it's always a wild ride. Um, I'm a very odd duck in the data space. I actually did my undergraduate degree in aerospace engineering, and I started my career at Textron Aviation, then Cessna, as an engineer. So there's a certain extent to which I'm pretty good with numbers and math, and was at the time that I started that career. But for the majority of my career, I was just an engineer. I designed airplane parts. I worked on the Citation Longitude and the Beechcraft Denali, and designed a great number of components on those airplanes. I love to this day to go walk down on the factory floor and point out to people the parts that I designed. Um, then essentially around the 5 year mark of my career, I recognized that at the end of the day, while I certainly contributed to the design of the aircraft, the reality was the design of the aircraft was informed primarily by the customer. We're meeting their demand, we're meeting their need. And I sought a career path that would get me closer to understanding that need and also potentially having influence on the design at a higher level. So I went and completed an MBA. I worked in marketing for a little bit. Then there were some structural changes in the organization. I went back to engineering. And then many years later, this was back in 2018, I did a rotational program in our aftermarket business. And while I was in that program, there was a gentleman, a really great guy, a manager of a team over there, that showed me this process that he had where every morning at 7 or 8 in the morning when he got to work, he would take this email that was this daily report that he got of work in progress items, like backlog, essentially. And he would copy and paste those values into an Excel. And that was how he tracked his team's performance over time. And I saw that and thought, that's crazy. There's got to be a better way to do this. Because what happens if he's sick one day, then suddenly you lost the data? Or just in general, I mean, this was a manager in a pretty important and high-paced part of the business that was spending 10 minutes a day, every single day, structuring this data. And I asked about it and I talked with some people and I met a gentleman that showed me Power BI. And I picked it up right away and became a huge fan of it. And throughout the rotational program that I was in, I was finding more and more opportunities to work with data. And lo and behold, at the end of that program, I had the opportunity to step into a data analyst role for our parts business, which I took. And so back at the end of 2018, my title wasn't even data analyst. It was like process leader or something like that. Was working very closely with our pricing team, had the opportunity to go hire some data analysts and create a data analytics team, and it just grew from there.
That's great. So you've literally been there from the start and have been nurturing this process along.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been kind of wild to see the growth because, like I said, I when I started in data, my job title wasn't data, because it was still, even as an industry, I mean, was still pretty new and growing. And even when my team formed, there were pockets and handfuls of people doing data analytics type work throughout the business. And there certainly was an IT element that was doing data work, but it was largely old school reporting, right? It was creating
Hmm.
tables and sending those tables to people that would then manipulate them in Excel. It wasn't really what we consider data analytics to be today.
Hmm.
And since I created that team in parts, we now have teams in nearly every part of the organization. I think it's 7 or 8 teams. Like I said, I was nobody had a data analyst job title in the whole
Hmm.
company. And now there's 50, 60 people with that title and it continues to grow. And we barely had one Power BI and now there's probably 1,000, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's the governance part of my job is deciding, whether that's a good thing. But the growth has been pretty remarkable to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Now it's everything from working at the data acquisition end to improve the capture of data to analytics and reporting, dashboarding, and then machine learning, right? And so you've got the whole gamut.
Yeah,
That's
and I
pretty
think
great.
that what, as we've matured, we've one of the things that's been coming up recently that's been a big maturity step for us, and I think a shift toward the future is recognizing that for the longest time, and basically my whole career in data at the company, we worked very much with, we have a bunch of data, what can we do with it? And now what I'm trying to do is challenge the culture to say, don't start with what you have, start with what you need or what you would need to know to answer a question, because we may find that there may be data that we don't currently have, but if we make a change or we improve a process, or we just go out to the market and make a purchase because you can buy data,
Yeah,
um, we can fill those gaps and answer deeper and more impactful questions for the business.
that's outstanding. Oh, great. So now tell us what's most fun in your work. What do you most enjoy about it?
I think I'll answer this in two ways and speak first to data as a whole, and
Mhm.
then specifically to my role. Um, as much as I joke that my background is not very traditional in data, at the end of the day, being an engineer is effectively a data-driven
Mhm.
profession, because you're doing analysis, you're doing design, you're considering things like weight and strength and efficiency. So there's a very analytical nature to that type of work that I think translated really well into the data space. And it maybe makes me sound like a jerk, but I love to prove people right or wrong with data, with math, with numbers. And what I think is most exciting about the data profession as a whole is the ability to make that connection between what the data shows and what we feel or what we see happening in the real world. And to take that a step further, and I think it ties into the storytelling piece, is what story does the data tell us that may be something that we didn't realize or didn't recognize or didn't even know? You start to look at the data and find patterns or behaviors that you may not have ever thought of or noticed in the way that people act, or the data starts to explain maybe why people make a decision the way that they make a decision, or why, not to be too superfluous, but like why the world is the way that it is, right? Not in a right, wrong, or indifferent way. Just you start to recognize, oh, people see things a certain way that leads them to act a certain way. When they act that way, it has this impact. It's very similar to like economics or engineering or any other science like that. So data as a whole, I just love that explaining the world in such a direct and scientific way. For my role in particular, I think that I have a unique opportunity, um, being this culture ambassador, to really affect change in the organization and see that change be for the positive. Seeing us become data driven, shape the way that we work to be more efficient so that people can be more productive and basically just enjoy their jobs more. I mean, nothing feels better than automating a process that somebody is spending 2 hours of their time on every day and turning into something that they just have to look at once a week and just, or, it just runs itself in the background, because that's time that they can then, spend working on something else. It reduces stress. It makes their home work balance better. I mean, it's a little bit maybe taking it a step too far to say that we're changing the world with data, but I think that there is a dramatic shift in the way that we operate, the better that we get at leveraging data to help make decisions, to help automate processes and improve the organization.
Yeah, that's well put. Very cool. And one of the interesting things is, as we were talking a couple of years ago and thinking about just the ways that we can work to make sure that the data science curriculum is really solid and relevant to the real world, right? We knew we wanted to beef up a number of components, everything from the analytics to then the machine learning and machine learning operations, which you helped us identify as a key need in the marketplace. And so that's in there. But amidst it all, right, you expressed that you really got a passion for the data storytelling part of it. So Why is that? How did you discover the importance of data storytelling, and why is that the place where you really want to focus your instruction as you're teaching in this program?
Yeah, I think that um, I'm trying to think of some poignant way of phrasing this, or a one-liner, a quote of essentially, it doesn't really matter how good of a realization you make in data if nobody is listening when you try to tell them. When
Mhm.
I started out in the data space, I had a pretty free reign to kind of, I don't want to say do whatever I wanted to do. I mean, that's a little bit facetious, but we were just exploring data, and I had a boss and a mentor that was very open to just curiosity, right? There
Mhm.
were questions that she had about the business of decisions that she was trying to make, but not necessarily like an understanding yet at that point of what our data could do for us. Um, and what that meant was that at the time, I did a lot of different things. I tried everything. I visualized data 100 different ways. I mean, I had Power BI dashboards that were 20 pages, 20 different pages of charts and graphs, and the same thing shown 36 different ways.
Mhm.
And it was very easy for me, being the data person, to dive in and make an observation about the business from that. But what I started to realize very quickly was that when I would try to show that to others or influence decision makers, I wasn't very successful because they weren't as fluent in the data as I was. Regardless of their level of overall data literacy, I'm exploring this data in a way that maybe they hadn't looked at. And if I just say, well, go look at this dashboard, it'll answer your question, that doesn't really work. Um,
Mhm.
so the storytelling part of it is essentially, in order to really recognize the value of data, somebody has to make a decision based on it. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter how good of an insight you give if the customer or the audience for that insight either doesn't care, doesn't understand, or isn't convinced to change their behavior, then what difference does it make? And I think that the data industry as a whole has kind of seen that happen over time as companies go and they hire data scientists, and data scientists go and do extraordinary things. But then CEOs say, well, I'm not really getting value from my data. So what I recognize in that is that at its heart, you can have the best data team in the world, but if they can't tell the story that the data is telling them to the audience that they're trying to convince to change or support a decision, then it doesn't do any good. And so to me, I was a big proponent, as we were talking about the program, of having a course that taught people how to do that and how to tell
Mhm.
that story, and really focusing on how do you how do you get people to understand data in these really exciting ways that then leads them to make the right decisions. And we've seen in the roles that I've had, we've been successful at pitching really big data-driven initiatives that have created huge amounts of value for the organization. And I don't think we would have been as successful at that if we didn't understand the art of how to tell that story when the time came.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're one of, several people I've run into sort of have, you've been there from the first, you've been helping develop the data operation, and then you and this handful of others that are so eloquent on this point really discovered that communication is so key to that. All right, you commented that you're kind of weird in the data space, but most people are weird in the data space. I mean, not everybody came from a data analytics or a data science background, and I came from a communication background and have
Mhm.
moved over time, over the period of years, into technology and analytics. But that communication piece has recurrently proven to be something that's just absolutely necessary and essential, because without that, right, all this great work just falls into a black hole and nothing gets
Right.
done with it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that it's even really novel in the data space because you often hear for any profession that one of the skills that sets you apart as a candidate is presentation skills or communication skills.
Right.
Even being an engineer, you had to be a pretty good communicator to be an effective professional engineer. This is just a specific form or variant of those same skills that brings in the data skills, but adds in that communication piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the audience, I just have to point out that one of the classic texts that we actually also build into our curriculum is Cole Knaflich's Storytelling with Data by Cole Nussbaumer-Knaflich. And she accumulated the same experience while at Google and before that in the financial industry. And so the story just gets repeated over and over again, right? How important it is to really be able to communicate that. And so between a text like that, the hands-on projects, and an instructor like Jacob, it really becomes a great place to cut our teeth, right? And the development of that knack, that ability to really um, polish up the insights and present them in such a way that they gain a hearing and really get listened to. So that's been a huge deal. Thanks again for leading that. We've talked about these interviews and we've decided we're going to keep them focused and kind of short. So I think this is great content for this one. And I just want to thank you again for joining me in this, but let's do it again someday.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. If it wasn't apparent from this interview, I love talking about data and data culture and data analytics. So I would absolutely love to get back and dive in deeper.
We will. We'll do it.